Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we'll be discussing the Rambam, the very last halacha of Hilchos Mechira. The Rambam writes as follows: Hamecher ayam nosen b'Shabbos ve'ein tzarich lemer b'Yom Tov. Anyone who sells something or gives a gift on Shabbos, and it goes without saying that the same would apply to Yom Tov, aval pisha Makneh say ma'aseh p'yomim. It is a valid transaction, even though he will be administered rabbinical forms of lashes for violating the law that prohibits selling or giving gifts on Shabbos. There are some exceptions, but we won't go into those halachas right now. So in other words, Rambam is making it clear you're not allowed to give a gift on Shabbos or Yom Tov, but if one did so, the Kinyan, the Kinyan is valid. The person has ownership of that object. So the question here is, according to Makneh, Pinchas HaLevi Horowitz, in his Kedushim on Shulchan Aruch Even Ezer, says that the prohibition of giving a gift on Shabbos and Yom Tov devolves on the recipient of the gift, not on the one who gives the gift. The Meshech Chochma, the Netziv, and Meshech Chochma says the opposite, that the Issur is on the giver and not on the one who receives it. But the Marsham raises a question from this Rambam. How could you say that the prohibition is only on the one who receives it, not on the giver? Here the Rambam makes it clear that nosen, Shabbos, who gives the gift on Shabbos, he gets these lashes for violating the rabbinic law that says you're not allowed to give a gift on Shabbos. So it says clearly it's gone the nosen, on the one who gives. The Makneh is not the only one who makes this chiddush. It's also Rav Shlomo Kluger in the Sefer HaChaim. He says the same thing, that the prohibition is on the recipient, not on the one who gives the gift. So there's a Sefer Pischei Chochma who tries to distinguish between different cases. The case that the Rambam is talking about, and in the Halacha itself, he talks about Chalipin. That's where there's a Kinyan that involves the giver as well. It's not just the person saying to the recipient, I'm giving you this gift, now you make the Kinyan on it, but he himself is involved in the Kinyan and the Kinyan Chalipin. So since he is involved in the act, he is also involved in a prohibition. If it's any other Kinyan, the person just tells you, I want you to keep this object, and you make the Kinyan Meshech. In that case, the giver is only saying something. He's not really acting out the acquisition. It's not his involvement in the acquisition itself, just the permission he gives for the person to take what it is that he's giving him as a gift. But while it might fit into the words of the Rambam, the Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Shabbos Siman Shin Vav makes it clear, and it's based on the Magen Avram, that the prohibition isn't any kind of Kinyan. Prohibition is on the one who gives the gift, perhaps also the one who receives the gift. One could possibly have said that the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe are not talking about the prohibition of giving the gift, but the one who receives the gift is the one who does the act of acquisition, the primary act of acquisition that involves him in a prohibition. But the giver is also guilty of another crime. He's guilty of Violates or Messiah l'dei Avera. You're not allowed to provide another person with an opportunity to do an Avera. And even if you didn't do anything, you just caused that person to do the Avera, you're Lifnei, a biblical prohibition, or at least Messiah, you're assisting someone to do an Avera. Now, one could argue over here that since it's only an Issur D'Rabbanan, there's no Issur Lifnei Iver. But that's disputed. There's a Machlekes and Tosfos in two places. One, Tosfos says that Pnei Violates applies even to a rabbinical prohibition. It's no worse than giving a person a bad advice. But in another place, Tosfos says, no, it doesn't apply to a rabbinical prohibition. It only applies to a biblical prohibition. At any rate, it's not mashma from the Rambam that the prohibition on the giver is because of Pnei Violates. Now, the Nafkaminu Halacha, what's the difference if the Issur is on the giver or the Issur is on the recipient? And even if you say the Issur is on the both, the giver is over because he's facilitating an Aveira for the recipient, there could still be a Nafkaminu Halacha. The Nafkaminu would be if you're in Eretz Yisrael, you're from Chutz La'aretz, and you're planning to return, and you're not mechuyev to keep the second day of Yom Tov, so you can give a gift on the second day of Yom Tov, but could you give a gift to someone who lives in Eretz Yisrael who doesn't have to keep the second day of Yom Tov? So you're keeping the second day of Yom Tov, you're duty bound to observe the second day of Yom Tov, but you're giving it to someone who is not obligated to keep the second day of Yom Tov. If we say the prohibition is only on the recipient, there's no prohibition over here. Why? Because the recipient is a Ben Eretz Yisrael who's not mechuyev in keeping the second day of Yom Tov. But if the Issur is on the nosen, or in that case, even if the nosen's Issur is because of Lifnei Ivor, there's no Lifnei Ivor. He's not causing a stumbling block. The person is allowed to receive the gift. But if the Issur is on the nosen, the one who's giving it, the Mechira of Pischei Chochma argues, in that case, there would be a prohibition because he is obligated by virtue of it being the second day of Yom Tov for him not to give a gift on Yom Tov. One could still argue and say that since the reason he's prohibited in giving the gift is because it's creating a Kinyan, and the Kinyan is forbidden, but if the Kinyan is not forbidden for the recipient, maybe it wouldn't be forbidden for the nosen as well. So one could go back and forth over here, but at least it's clear from the Rambam that the prohibition is on the one who gives the gift, and the Alter Rebbe makes it clear that it's also on the one who receives it, contrary to the Meishim Davar. Why? Because the Alter Rebbe says that in a case where the person who gives the gift tells you to make a Kinyan, and you make a Kinyan, you close the door of the house, and that's your Kinyan, so that it's prohibited to close the door. Why is it prohibited? You're the recipient, so it's mashma that the recipient is also forbidden. The prohibition is on both equally, the giver and the recipient.